I'm Heath Carter. I am a faculty member here at the seminary in the history department and the director of PhD studies. And this year, it's been my great privilege to convene a series, a kind of public-facing conversation series on faith and the future of American democracy. And so today, I want to share a little bit with you about kind of what the series has been about, and then I get to have a little conversation with some of our brilliant graduating students, and we'll invite you all into the conversation before all is said and done as well. So it should be fun. I'll just say a few brief remarks, and I'll show you a little clip that gives you a little flavor of what the series has been this year. For me, the series emerged out of an interest, obviously a lot of people talking about democracy in recent years, and my conviction as a faculty member here has been that really the seminary should be in the mix and should be a place that's known for resourcing, providing thoughtful conversation, broad conversation about some of the most pressing issues facing our country and the world, and certainly this seemed to me to be one of them. It's been a delight and joy. One of the kind of hunches that I had coming into it was that if we wanted to convene conversation with folks that are really doing important work in public life, that we could, and that they would say yes. And in fact, that turned out to be the case. As I reached out to folks all year and asked them, hey, would you want to be a part of this conversation, whether on Zoom or here in person at Wright Library? We had several events here on campus. I just got a lot of yeses. I mean, obviously some no's, some people couldn't make it this year or whatnot, but a lot of folks really engaged and interested in the conversation. We're living through a period of great uncertainty and a period in which Christianity has certainly been quite prominently engaged in various ways. And a period, obviously, and we could talk about this maybe on our panel, of surging white Christian nationalism. Some of my colleagues in the field of American religious history have studied that. One of my other convictions coming into this work was that the seminary had an opportunity to kind of fill a lane that is under there's not as much presence in it as there should be. There's a lot of kind of Christian nationalist content on how to be engaged in public life. There's some really good, and I'm grateful for this content, some really good interfaith content. There's not a lot of content that is helping people who are looking to live out their Christian faith in public in a thoughtful way. And so I thought this was a way for us to kind of make a contribution to the church and the society beyond. The hope for the series all the way through has been that the conversation would be broad and fair and illuminating and oriented toward truth. Those were the kind of characteristics that we were seeking to cultivate over the course of this year. And it's been remarkable. We've talked to senators and representatives and journalists and scholars and pastors and bishops and more. And it's been a really wide-ranging and exciting conversation. I'm going to show you this short clip. These are all from the fall. There's a series website. If you search Future of American Democracy, Princeton Seminary, and if you search MailChimp, because that's the host site, you'll come up and you can see all the conversations. But here's a clip that has some little tidbits from the fall part of the series. This past fall, we launched a conversation series on the future of American democracy that I hope would be fair, broad, illuminating, and oriented toward truth. It's been all that and more.
There's something deeper than facts. Facts matter, to be very clear. But I think that finding that, because sometimes if you get in a fact off with someone, you're in hell. And I think that
I bear the scars on my body and my soul, living in a church that has official policy that people like me are not welcomed.
This past fall, we launched a conversation series on the future of American democracy that I hope would be fair, broad, illuminating, and oriented toward truth. It's been all that and more.
there's something deeper than facts. Facts matter, to be very clear. But I think that finding that, because sometimes if you get in a fact off with someone, you're in hell. And I think that
I bear the scars on my body and my soul, living in a church that has official policy that people like me are not welcomed.
I'm excited for our spring lineup, which is guaranteed to generate more stirring, thought-provoking, inspiring moments like these.
I deeply believe that that progressive forces need to be small e evangelical. They need to want to convert souls.
Well, to put it frankly,
in the spring, we
this
focus
is
on
the clergy.
institutions.
Stop
Faltering
being
faith in
con
institutions.
artists.
There's a lot of research right now.
Stop being con
underscoring
artists.
that,
There's a perception of
we're living
polarization in
through a
Congress
time
that,
of kind
at
of
least in the
historic,
last year and a half, is not met by
plummeting
reality.
of faith in institutions.
Make sure to check out our
All
website
the
to stay up to date on the
manifestations
series.
for church
The
and
conversation
society
will be
and
richer with
development.
you
So we
in
have
it.
a bunch of really interesting conversations along those lines. So today, what's going to be fun is I get to have a little conversation with 4 of these kind of brilliant graduating students who, honestly, actually, maybe I should borrow that mic for a second. Can you hear me? Great. I think we're also being joined by alums in other parts of the country, so thank you all for joining us too. A lot of the conversations that we had this year honestly emerged out of conversations that I've had with students over the last 4 years that I've been teaching at the seminary, and their questions that have always and their important insights that challenge me and have often just left me really thinking and pondering the way forward. And so whether they knew it or not, these 4 students have been people that have inspired a lot of the questions and conversations that were a part of the series this year. And so I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, just say a few words about what they've been up to. And then we're going to do like a little kind of pilot of what we've been doing this year. And then, we'll try to leave about 15 minutes for you all to jump in with your own questions and comments, and we'll just see how it goes. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlos first.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Acosta. I am graduating this year, but I also graduated last year, so I'm class of 22 and 23. And I hope to pursue further studies in Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and become an Old Testament scholar.
Good morning. My name is Candace Lovelace. I am kind of like the next phase Carlos because I'm going to be class of 23 and class of 24. I'm graduating with an MDiv this year and staying around for the first year of the new Masters of Arts in Theology and Ecology. So yeah, I'm looking to establish some rural retreat space for Black pastors and community leaders. And I'm interested in ecological conversation in general for the Earth's benefit, but also for the Earth's ability to benefit the well-being of leaders who need replenishment, I think.
I do. I'm Ben Rudin Kreider. I am also a graduating MDiv student. But last year, I took the year off from studies here at Princeton Seminary and got my Master of Social Work in Management and Policy from Rutgers University. And I will be starting, yes, I see some claps there. I'm going to be starting as the pastor at Chapel Hill Mennonite Fellowship in North Carolina this fall. So I'm really excited about congregational life in the Mennonite world.
My name is Tori Paquette. I use they, them pronouns. I came here from Colby College with a degree in Jewish Studies, where I worked for the Center for Small Town Jewish Life. And that really informed my trajectory in seminary, thinking about what does it look like to engage small congregations in small communities, think about what it looks like to work for social justice and economic justice in those spaces. So that's what I hope to do after seminary.
So, I mean, one of the things, and I think this is where we can maybe start the conversation, is, part of this series and the conversation all year emerged out of this sense that in a maybe not unique way, but in a way that's nevertheless been really deeply felt across the country and across all kinds of lines of divide, that this is a time of uncertainty, a time where democracy itself may be in some kind of peril or some kind of trial. And so I wonder, as you think about this from the different locations that you all kind of come at this question and where you sit and where you're headed, are you worried about democracy in the United States? Are you worried about the future of democracy here? And we don't have to go in order every time, so however you all, if someone feels led to jump in, feel free, but I'm going to pass the mic.
I can share since I have the microphone in my hand. Yes, very, actually. I recognize that I haven't lived very long, but in my 25 years of life, I feel like I've never seen so much intolerance as I have now. To the most extreme extent, folks not wanting to even be in the same room as someone that disagrees with them, or as someone that they perceive as disagreeing with them. It's become kind of incredible, I think. And that's concerning because we need to be in conversation with each other. We can't continue to be polarized like this and not be talking to each other because nothing is going to get done. And social media has not helped. I don't know if many of you are Facebook users, but those advertisements you get, maybe for your favorite jeans or what have you, whatever you like to shop for online, those are filtered according to your interests based on something called the algorithm, which tracks what you click on and what you like, things like that. And so just as it does for products, material products, it does the same thing with political messages and media. And so folks who might identify on one end of the political spectrum are constantly seeing things that only they would agree with. And the same is true for the other side. So I don't see the internet helping. And as the situation is what it is now, people not wanting to talk to one another, it really concerns me. So I think conversations like this are needed. But yeah, I am concerned.
I also am pretty greatly concerned. I think what gives me hope about the future of democracy is the innovative, kind of seemingly organically accepting spirit of a lot of Gen Z, of which I am not, so this is not me tooting my own horn. But I think that generation has a tendency toward acceptance of one another in a different way. It's absolutely not absolute, but it's better than I think I've seen from even millennials and all of the rest of us. But I have some hope also because I think that spirit is kind of carrying across generations in a lot of spaces. What concerns me, however, is two things. One, I think that it's pretty clear that some people's voices are still being prioritized over other people's voices. And so that poses an immediate challenge to the quality of democracy. And the second part, which is why I think the Future of Democracy series has been so important, Dr. Carter, is because people really won't talk to each other about their differences. Even here in seminary, in specific classrooms, I think your classroom has been one of those spaces, but only in specific classrooms do people have differences and discuss them. Oftentimes the differences are obviously had and not discussed. And so I'm not sure how far we can get in understanding one another in such a way that we prize each other's voices equally so that democracy can really thrive if we don't converse.
For me, it's been some classes like yours, Dr. Carter, and some other history classes that make me as a 30-year-old, even in my despair and my frustration, be like, yeah, these sort of institutions have always been fragile of how we do public life together, how we, like what we see as shared and good and what that common good should be has always been contested, yet deeply, so many people investing in. some vision of that I think is always worth pursuing. So I think I come with a maybe tentative hopefulness about democracy, and that maybe stretches to my own like early childhood memories of, you know, going with my parents to the Lions Club pancake feed early at 6 a.m. before school that would be open so people could get their vote in, and then I'd get dropped off smelling like pancakes and sausage for the rest of the day. So like to me, that's what democracy smells like. And I think sometimes when I'm only kind of focused on the real big, like New York Times, Washington Post, Twitter sort of headlines of like, Congress is intractable with this, the Supreme Court has been bought out by these moneyed interests. It can be really frustrating, so I think it's been helpful for me to think about democracy in more expansive, participatory ways, even extending to really local fights and really material, kind of local things, like how do we make this library happen? How do we get affordable housing for people that really need it? How do we, shape local schools so that they're racially just and reflect who our community is, and serve the kids who are here. Like all those things is democracy, but I think I sometimes forget that that's the people trying to do public life when I only am focused on some of these issues of like Supreme Court, Congress, President, these big federal, national challenges. So yeah, I love history, and I think history gives me, I don't want to think of ourselves as, it's an exceptional moment, yes, and we are facing questions I think have been here for a long time.
It's nice to be at the end of this line because I get to hear all of you first think through what I want to say. I think personally I feel concerned right now as a queer and trans person because of the 500 plus anti-LGBTQ bills that have come about in 2023 alone. And I think that does speak more broadly to the issues we're facing as a nation, one of which I think is kind of the self-imposed ignorance of many people to not look things up or educate themselves. And I realize, as Carlos said, that there is an algorithm, right, that gives you the answers you want to hear. But also I feel like it shouldn't be that hard to Google what is gender-affirming care and read a medical website. And that's true about lots of other issues too, right? That we choose not to engage sources that we disagree with, or we choose not to engage even facts or evidence because we don't want to be wrong, because we don't want to admit that we're wrong, we don't want to change our mind, and that is, I think, the most scary thing to me right now.
So this has already come up in a lot of your kind of opening comments here, but I mean, one of the big themes of the series this year was about kind of what does our faith call us to do in a world that's deeply polarized? In a world where people don't talk across lines of difference, where we see society seemingly kind of pulling apart in a deep way. And, I've had different kinds of conversations with folks over the course of this year where I think there's really important points on different sides of this. I think there are, one of the very first, maybe the very first conversation I had was with an alum of Princeton Seminary, Melissa Flora Bixler, who's a Mennonite pastor in Durham, North Carolina, speaking with Duke Kwan, who's a Presbyterian minister, I think in D.C., and Bishop Kieran Olivito, who you saw a brief clip of here at the beginning, who's the first openly queer bishop in the Methodist Church. And there's this exchange in that conversation, if you have a chance to check it out, I'd really recommend it, between Melissa and Karen, where it's actually right after Karen says this line about, I bear on my body the scars of being in a denomination where there's official policy that says I don't belong. And then she goes on to lament the departure, I don't know how much you're following Methodist developments right now, but the departure of the conservatives from the Methodist denomination kind of en masse right now. She says, I deeply lament that they're leaving because, in my view, it's a scandalous witness that we're called to find a way to be together. And she's like, I lament it because I think they, meaning the conservatives, need to be transformed. And then she pauses for a second, and it's a very poignant exchange. She says, and I also know that I need to be transformed, and that's the work that the Holy Spirit can do. That's where it kind of and that question, that she was responding in part to Melissa Flora Bixler's comment, which was another really important comment, that this exchange like kind of captured. I had another pastor who's an alum tell me this exchange like captured the conflict that she feels in her own life and ministry and in her own congregation. Because Melissa had made this point, who bears the burden and the cost of hanging together? It's not people with like great privilege, it's not powerful people, it's the people who, bear the scars on their body and on their soul of not being welcomed, not being accepted, and I think that cuts across. In Karen's case, she's talking about as a queer person, but it could be other identity markers as well. So this is something we're wrestling with on our campus, and this is something that I've been wrestling with all year in this conversation series is, I heard from a lot of folks as I talked about how to navigate polarization, where does our faith call us to, that our faith calls us to keep our circles broader than we feel comfortable with in the hope of transformation. And I heard other people saying, and I really felt this point too, like we need spaces that are spaces of affirmation where people can be nurtured and fed without having to always be building bridges. Because sometimes you don't want to be a bridge builder. And maybe there are moments and spaces where not everyone has to be. So anyway, there's a kind of lots of questions and thoughts, and I'd love to hear any of you. Again, we don't have to go down the line, but we can. However you want to do it. But I'm curious about what you think about all this. And feel free to tie it to this stuff you've experienced here at PTS too, if you want.
Wild Ben, I thought we were okay. So I mentioned earlier that I feel this calling to establish retreat space specifically for Black pastors and community leaders. And I have received both some very concerned and also some loving prodding to that idea. Sometimes people have been asking, well, don't you think everyone needs what it is that you're trying to do? Other times folks have outright said, well, that's polarizing of you. I think the first question was worth consideration, so I considered it. And then I settled in the fact that I believed I was being called to a specific realm of to caring for a specific grouping of people, essentially. And also respecting that if I do what it is that I believe I'm called to do well, then maybe the frameworks for that can be positively impactful for other people who could make use of it, right? But I think that the conversation about polarization and circles kind of has come up in me considering my own work and being comfortable seating in the fact that, no, this is for Black pastors and community leaders. I think the way that I think about this circles thing in the context of that is, it makes sense to me that you would have some space that feels particularly replenishing to you. And so I think people should have spaces that are replenishing to them. And sometimes that means that other people are not in those spaces also replenishing with them. Now, I think we also have to check whether what it is that we're seeking is replenishment or validation for the ideas that make us comfortable. So going to a conference, for example, that is only inclusive of people that you might be comfortable conversing with, might not necessarily need to be a repeatedly replenishing activity. And so, especially when it comes to minoritized groups, I think it is always important to be mindful of, like smaller circles and care, because in, Latinx space, in Asian space, in Black space, in queer space, and we could keep going on, these groups of people have to make acceptance where there often is none. So it's got to happen that way. But I agree that it's important overall to keep the circle uncomfortably wide, but I think the replenishment aspect has to happen so that you can do the bridge building, I guess. I could have said that shorter.
I have a thought in my mind, so I'll just run with it. I want to nuance my former comment about how folks are so reluctant to be even in the mere presence of people who they are so different from, let alone be in community. I think there are exceptions where that's okay, because I'm thinking I am very privileged. I am a straight cisgender man. I don't know what it's like to be in, say, Tori's shoes. I don't know what it's like for someone to feel that my lifestyle is of concern to them and that they need to be openly against it and also me. So I think in those instances, it's okay to not want to be in community or in dialogue with those people. But apart from those very extreme circumstances, I think it's necessary, so long as it's healthy. But I'm thinking about these circles. What role do faith leaders play? And I've been asking myself this question for the past few days, thinking about today. And this might not be popular in this room, but I wonder, does this country need faith leaders? Does this country need faith leaders? I think all of us want to say yes, and so do I, right? But part of me also wants to say, no, maybe not. And there's an internal battle that I have on those grounds. And I think maybe there's a middle ground that we should all think about. I think this question is worth asking, and I think it needs to be asked, frankly. I don't think people necessarily need faith leaders. I think they need an advocate who has a heart for their God. And I think everyone in this room and those at the seminary and those in the seminary community and beyond, those in the church, can be those people. I don't know what we're thinking about that. I don't know if that makes us uncomfortable. I don't know what I think about that. I don't know what I'll think about that when I watch this video tomorrow or later this week. But I think it's something to ask. Should our primary concern be to bring people in relationship with God, which is very important? Please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that that's not something we should be thinking about. But right now, is it more important for people to have an advocate where we can host conversations like this in our space, in our churches, where we can provide resources, where we can provide community, you know? Yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. And is this working? Yeah. It has a bit of a lag. For both those comments, those were helpful. I think one of the things often that I've experienced in these church spaces that are purple is like, when I ask the question, do you want to stay purple, or do you want your congregation to shift more in a certain direction? There's this kind of glorification of like, we want to stay purple. We want to stay in this ambiguous in-between space. And I understand like wanting to create spaces where people can have conversations and transform. But do we actually want those communities to transform in a way that will make them look different in the long run? And I think also part of the way people frame this is they say, like, we want to be able to have space for differences and divisions and disagreements. But I think there are some things that are not just differences or disagreements. Like, I think calling anti-LGBTQ beliefs a difference is a real misnomer, because, like, if I'm in a community that is like serving in a community that has both anti-LGBTQ views and pro, I'm not like my full self. And I have worked and served in those communities, right? And I think there's an intentional choice on my part, and it's not a choice I would make for everybody else. I would just say, like, I have this amount of emotional capacity to give to this church or this group at this time, and I'm not going to have deep, meaningful friendships with the people who disagree with my lifestyle, right? Because I don't think, it doesn't come down to a disagreement for me. It's like, my human dignity, my personhood. And if you can't accept my human dignity or my personhood, then there are going to be really strict boundaries. I think often in the church especially, we don't have lots of room for those boundaries. We're like, we must be able to hold differences, we must be able to reconcile, we have to be long-suffering and forgiving. And I don't think that that's always required of us. I think in the church we don't give enough people enough agency to set boundaries on their own emotional capacity. I think we have to be allowed in and by the church to say, no, actually, I'm not going to be in relationship with you because it's harmful for me. And that doesn't mean I'm unchristian or unchristlike. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
On this question of circles and how close do we keep these circles of relationships versus wide and broad. The church where I just accepted a call to be pastor at, they a few years ago had a woman who was in sanctuary there for about 2 years. This small Mennonite church meets in a Presbyterian church that rents space to them on Sunday evenings. And these Mennonites and these Presbyterians linked up to provide sanctuary to this woman who was facing deportation from ICE. So these communities of faith, these Christian churches, had some deep faith commitments that led to some very concrete political opinions, particularly in opposition to the way that the federal government was seeking to deport certain vulnerable people. In that moment, that congregation became a tight circle of care and protection and love, making sure that this woman was able to thrive until she could get her legal situation resolved. I see that as an example of like a good, it's not an all political opinions, like let's just talk about it situation. It's like, no, hands on deck because we need to live out our faith. So I've been, I think, shaped in my time here by kind of a community organizing framework, by a nonviolence, strategic nonviolent action framework, which doesn't seek to destroy your opponent, but like, here's where the Holy Spirit comes in, always a sort of seeking that constant transformation of both ourselves and the other, but through means that build up. And so there could be, the story I shared about the churches is a pretty extreme example, but I can see lots of examples where you can collaborate with others, people in your community, your neighbors, other churches. You might have profound disagreements in certain areas on, but I think it's always crucial to be looking, be curious, see where the Spirit's moving for that collaborative space. But I would say it doesn't need to be all the things with all the people on the same page. And for me, it's been some of the tools of organizing and, yeah, particularly the nonviolent-minded organizers who see ways to be working collectively with people they have profound disagreements with in some areas, but they're like, we need to get this done, and I need you on my team for this. But that requires a commitment not to destroy or demean others.
Ben, I just wanted to say that's a beautiful example of illustrating what I was trying to articulate. I think our faith should inform what we do first when it comes to these issues, these things. And then, you know, as God does, the thing will happen. God will do the thing. And yeah, thank you for making that comment.
So, I mean, I think part of the thing that has concerned a lot of folks about polarization is that it seems to be one force that's sort of undermining or undercutting the strength of institutions. And I want to ask one more question, and then we'll kind of open it up. You know, this is a time of historic, loss of trust in institutions across generational lines, across institutional lines, all different kinds of institutions, from the media and Congress to churches. We know we're living through a time of historic disaffiliation from religious institutions of all kinds. I'm sure you've heard of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and it's a very complex conversation. We know that those folks are largely not like atheists necessarily, but they're folks that have, for whatever reason, not found it important or meaningful or desirable to personally affiliate with an institution, an institutional faith in some sense. So this is something I thought a lot about since coming to PTS, where I've learned, again, so much from our students, who I think often I've experienced in conversation with them have a kind of wholly often impatience with the pace of institutional change. Institutions change slowly, and the world is not as it ought to be. And wow, wouldn't it be better if the world was a very different kind of place, and really if it was that place today or tomorrow? And part of the way, for better, maybe also for worse, that institutions change is really slow often. And so I think about the four of you who are going off, leaving this institution where you've been engaged for the last 3 or 4 years, and headed out into communities where you'll be embedded in different kinds of institutional and communal settings. And I wonder how you think about the work of, so Sherilyn Eiffel, who's was longtime head of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, was here back in March. She made this comment that democracy will not survive without strong institutions. And she was really excited to talk about faith and churches and whatnot, and also thinking more broadly than that. She also said, Heath, we don't want to just strengthen existing institutions that are corrupt or that are, we want to transform institutions. But again, I think that's slow work. So I think about, for the four of you, how do you think about institutions these days? How do you think about that slow work? Do you feel like, is that part of your sense of vocation in one way or another to be engaged in that kind of slow work? Do we need new institutions? Do we need new ways of engaging? Are there ways that you think we can speed up the work? I mean, I'm just curious, any thoughts you have on any of that kind of terrain? And I should just say, generationally, we do know that it's a cross-generation phenomenon, but certainly in younger generations, this is an especially pronounced phenomenon, this lack of trust in institutions. Whoever wants to jump in.
The week after I visited as a prospective student in the fall of 2018, the seminary released their historical audit on slavery. And I saw that as a sign of institutional strength, and I said, I want to come to be a student here in an institution that's trying to be more honest about its own history, about its own institutional bearings and foundations, messy and horrific as they sometimes are, because I wanted to be learning in a place that wanted to be self-reflective about what its institutional identity was and could be, because I see one of the roles of the faith leader is to help kind of narrate and give language to these social bonds that we share in the church or in other structures, to try to speak out loud these ties that we all feel, these deep commitments and loyalties to institutions, but also if we've gotten burnt or excluded by them, we feel that, but it's how do you touch that, and where do you sort of put that? I think this is actually a place the church has a lot of really strong language for. I think about all the New Testament language of wineskins and living stones and foundation. There's this it's always the paradox of stability and kind of relentless curiosity, and the Spirit's still moving and crumbling things and breaking prison walls, and God's always sort of on the loose inside and outside of whatever our institutions are, yet we're still called to build up with one another something. So I sort of think of institutions as inescapable, and so I kind of am a hopeful pragmatist in that regard. Even the folks that say, I don't want to be a part of this institution, I will be at home, I'm just going to watch Yoga with Adrian YouTube videos on my iPad, and that's going to do it for me. You're still within an infrastructure of YouTube and the internet and the advertisers that pop up that fund that video, and you're in your upstairs bedroom that was financed by a mortgage that the federal government insured, and even the most isolated acts are still acts surrounded by some sort of infrastructure of care. So I think about part of my own kind of calling as a faith leader is how do we help people name the deep pain and the deep hope we have for our kind of shared togetherness. And then move institutions always more towards belonging while acknowledging they're still human structures that have their prickly edges and their splinters.
Yeah, I think listening to you speak, Ben, it's particularly convicting when we think about the truth that the institutions are really just us. Like, it can be pretty, it can be pretty, and I find myself doing it. Like, when I think about PTS, I think, when I say PTS is or is doing, I'm literally thinking about the buildings, and that doesn't make practical sense. PTS is its administration, its faculty, its students, its alumni, its trustees. And so it makes sense that we should, it makes even more sense that we should be able to perceive God's presence continually working in the space of us. And I just wonder, to the point when you were talking about Sherilyn Eifel's conversation, Dr. Carter, to her point about, institutions having to be strong in order for democracy to survive. I think strength in an institution like this looks like availability to God's voice, continuing to be able to be reasserted as the governing voice in this institution, which is just a group of us. And I think if we can hold on to that, as opposed to holding on to our dictations of what institutions should look like, then we'll always be on the right side of things. But of course, that's not what we do. And it's not quite happening that simply. Not even here. Definitely not here. Go ahead.
I mean, there's a reason I'm Presbyterian, right? This is off. Yep. No, it's all good. I thought it was still green. There's a reason I'm Presbyterian, right? Like, I want to be part of it, of this institution, an institution. And there are two reasons for that for me. One is that I grew up evangelical, and the profound lack of institutional structure meant a lot of unsafety for me as an individual and people I loved, right? Like, there's no accountability for abuse. No, I mean, not that there always is in institutions either, right? But no accountability for the theology, the exegesis, the trauma, all that stuff. So that's the first. I think institutional structure can mean at least structures of accountability that can create safety. There's the possibility of that. The second reason is, it's been a very long time since I read this book, so I'll probably get it wrong. But in college, I read Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. And one of the things that really struck me about that, he was talking about the decline of social relationships and mental health and all those things since the 1950s. Obviously, the 1950s had a lot of problems, so I'm not saying that's the ideal in any way. But he tracked one of the factors for that as this decline of social institutions. And the fact that, like, institutions have the power to bring people together and to create communities and relationships of support, right? Like, if you have a social network, it means that when you don't have the money to pay the bills, somebody else can buy you groceries. You have people you can rely on. You have voices that can advocate for you. And I think, for me, that's one of the reasons that institutions are really important, because we become more polarized and disjointed when we don't have common bonds, shared goals, networks of support that we need to survive.
Controversial, but legendary New Testament scholar John Dominic Crossan once went on record to say, the most important chapter in the entire Christian Bible is Psalm 82. And in Psalm 82, God is depicted in either, the history of interpretation is, we're unsure, but, well, I think biblical scholars are pretty sure, but God is depicted either in the midst of the divine council of the lowercase g gods, or in the midst of the judges of the earth. And I'm going to read a part of this from verse 3. What he's doing is God is criticizing these gods or judges for their lack of justice, for their perverted rule. This is verse 3. Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. and this is verse 5. Many people interpret verse 5 to be God speaking to this divine council or these judges, but I think it makes a lot more sense that God is speaking to them about the earth, about the humans, about the outcome, the consequence of their unjust rule. Verse 5. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk around in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I see institutions very similarly. I think when institutions are struggling so much and there's a lack of faith because of what they are doing or not doing, the foundations of American democracy are shaken. They're tottering. And I think what's at the core of this, what's at the heart of this, is really justice. And I think that's something that we can take away from Psalm 82, the most important chapter in the entire Christian Bible, if you agree with John Dominic Crossan. And Sharon Eiffel also said that institutions need to be tended. Again, I think institutions, as much criticism as you want to give them, they were designed to do a good thing, and they certainly can do a good thing. They're capable. And I think if they're tended properly and appropriately, then they can. And I think the way that we do that is to critically evaluate and analyze like we're doing now. And so I hope that we can bring conversations like these beyond this campus and into American democracy.
We could talk all day, but we want to get you, give a chance for you also to jump into this conversation. I think we need to pass a mic so that our friends who are listening online can hear you. So if you want to raise your hand, and we've got a couple up front here, and try to keep your questions brief. We've got about 12 minutes to continue the conversation.
I'll be real brief. I'm Peter Bauer. I'm a United Church of Christ minister, licensed clinical social worker, marriage and family therapist, and mental health provider, and educator, teaching social work at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Here's my real live dilemma question, coming at you, live, not Memorex, as I tell my students. I'm at a gathering with my students at the end of April. I was teaching a groups practice course this spring. We're having dinner, we're having a lovely time. We're talking about how to maybe replicate groups to populations that are, shall we say, not really readily accessible to receiving group therapy. So I mentioned the possibility of maybe doing groups in churches and extending it maybe to women. Oh my goodness. One of my students, who's female and in her 30s, exceedingly bright woman, responds to me and she says, "Why would we do that? Churches don't support women at all." And here I did my best serve and started to talk about the work of the Presbyterian Church, the work of the United Church of Christ, the work of other denominations. But then I thought, well, Bauer, why are you surprised at this in light of the Hobbes decision? Why are you surprised about this in light of what's gone on with the Supreme Court? Why are you surprised about this in light of all the attacks that are going on with democracy? So tell me, what do I tell my student? Thank you.
I'm gonna, because we have a number, I'm gonna have, if one of you wants to take a particular question, and then we can, I want to keep, we'll get some other voices in too. So does anyone have a quick thought there?
I kind of have to respond to the fellow social worker. I think you did this, it sounded like, but I think you'd have to start by listening and agreeing and asking more. Tell me about your experiences with church. What does church mean? And not jump too quickly to trying to defend the church. I don't think we need to defend our own institutions, but try to make living space within them for God to work, for people to find flourishing. So I would be curious to just listen more and ask that person more. Tell me more about all these ways the church has not been helpful, and you probably would agree with many of those things. But I think the rush, I don't find myself in a place needing to defend the church. And so often in those conversations with the nuns, who are many of my peers, and sometimes I am that too, the churches can learn a lot by, I think, being in a position of curiosity And I think that's sometimes I face this coming out of Princeton Seminary. It's like, I'm going to be a pastor. That means, for a lot of people, a very negative thing. And so even if I'm like, no, but this Mennonite church is doing cool, but this, you got to meet these Presbyterians here. And like, oh, you don't know my friend who's doing these retreat spaces for black clergy. And I could go on and on and on. But I think we have to start with dealing with people with real pain and trauma that they've faced. I'd love to talk social work after, but.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Well, great conversation, you all. My question has to do with how you create change. And I speak from my first ministry out of Princeton Seminary was in the interior of Brazil, then followed by the military coup d'etat. And what I learned from the people in Brazil, that change comes through what Paulo Freire said, conscientização, a coming of awareness about what your situation is, so that you can change despair into hope. And so, to your comment about institutions, do we really need faith leaders? Remember, the word for redeemer means advocate in Hebrew, and we need prophets. This is what we need. So I would appreciate your comment about how change happens.
You want to take that one? It's a big question. Okay, Tori.
I'll just answer in brief because I don't actually know the answer to this question. But I think there has to be a certain amount of discomfort for people to be willing to change, like you said, despair. Especially, I mean, a lot of Presbyterian ministry right now is white, upper middle class ministry, right? And there's a lot of comfort. And so it's hard to get people to want to change if they're not feeling discomfort, if they're not feeling pain or despair. So I think it starts with like experiencing the pain and despair of other people, experiencing the ways in which white supremacy and heteronormativity and the patriarchy, et cetera, right, impact and affect and harm us too. We have to make people uncomfortable for them to want to change.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Carter, for bringing these students together to talk to us. And thank you. If you wouldn't mind, would you pull back sort of the 30,000-foot level and say whatever you want to about the hope for the future of American democracy in what it might lie.
This is a trend I don't like. So I was a 15-year naval officer. I think that's important information for what I'm about to say, because I have a particular lens through which has always been kind of like overhanging my view of democracy, or was for a very long time. I just got out of the Navy last year. And I got out and didn't retire, I think, because I wasn't able to continue viewing American democracy clean through that lens. I am grateful for my service. I think it, was important, is important. However, I just have a differing view. And I think, you asked us to kind of like pull out. I feel like I'm getting micro on thinking about democracy. I'm really interested in what organizations exist that can help groups of people who don't feel comfortable always, or feel like the use of their voice is welcomed. I'm interested in getting those people to the place where they feel like they can contribute to the conversation as much as they really have to contribute. And so I think that will impact kind of like the larger scheme of things. So I think that's a way of having hope. It's kind of trying to facilitate hope on smaller scales.
There's a consulting proverb that says, it's not really a crisis, it's only the end of an illusion. And what I wonder is, how much do you see this end of the illusion being the disillusionment with our idols, idolatry, and the need to get back to the voice of a living God, which, Ben, you have articulated so well. I think, and all of you, the voice of a living God. You know, we saw it at the organ concert, David and Goliath portrayed, and Goliath had nothing but the power of the living God.
You know, I think I really like that prompt to think that way, and I think one of the things that encourages me in recent years, and that younger generations in particular, I think, have taken up with gusto, and that I really believe in, is reckoning with our history, and reckoning with the myths that sometimes have framed our history, and I think there have been at least some signs in recent years that, as you know, not every person, obviously history is a huge battleground right now in our country, and there's not an agreement that we should be reckoning with it. But I think that it's a battleground because there has been some reckoning as well, and I think that's really important. We've been reckoning some here, as you all have alluded to. I think about you know, some of the polling that's been done in the wake of the rise of Black Lives Matter in the last 10 years, and the ways that, though we have deep, serious, enduring inequality and white supremacy is on the rise, at the same point we see people grappling in new ways, white people grappling, I think, in important ways with racism, structural racism, and its deep roots in our national history, so in that sense, I do think, if you look even at just I'm a historian, right? So if you look at my profession and the ways that the public conversation around history has developed in recent years, I think there's some promise there that we are willing to at least give these idols a strong skeptical look, and maybe find ways to find new stories to tell that are more faithful and more honest and more probing about the deep sin that has been carved into our past and that still shapes the landscapes that each of us walk through each and every day. I have hope in that. I teach a class, Life Together class here for our first year MDiv students called How We Got Here. And it's all about this question of, like, how does the history that we've, you know, experienced, you know, how does it shape the world that we walk through each day, and why does it matter for the world that we want to shape together moving forward? Anyway, so that's a little piece there. I don't know, we're about out of time, but I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything on that. Why don't I say this? Thank you all for this time, and especially thanks to these 4 brilliant soon-to-be alums. Well, already alum and soon to be again, and honestly, I hope you can see. Just, I mean, we've only been here for an hour, but what a profound, rich experience it is to teach here, because I get to really learn also from some of the most brilliant, thoughtful, faithful folks, and they challenge me. You've challenged me today and for 3 or 4 years, and I hope you'll continue to challenge me as you leave here and push. I love that, and I love that about this place, that we are a place where we can push one another in love and in hope. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of Reunion. Yeah.